When I first saw the smile, I thought I was already dead. It wasn't a smile to comfort. It was a spread of teeth older than language, a grin that filled the dark and refracted light into accusations. The room smelled of old paper, wet stone, and a faint metallic tang behind my teeth. The house had been empty for years, they said, but the air inside had been breathing. I moved in to get away from people who stitched opinions into your mail and called it concern. The Victorians sat on the edge of town like a rumor, flaking paint, a porch that sighed. At dusk, shadows pooled and the wallpaper's faded pattern seemed to watch when I brewed coffee. I told myself loneliness sharpens perception until ordinary things look like threats. The first night I heard a hiss from the walls. Too low to name, it was like a violin unstrung with breath. I went to the hallway. The lamp threw a thin pool of light. The mirror at the end showed me, but not entirely. Behind my reflection, the dark had a texture, a ripple like a lung. I laughed, a brittle sound. "You're being ridiculous," I said, and the house replied with a silence that listened. While unpacking, I found a brittle poster folded in a book. Bold red letters, "The Woman with a Body of a Serpent." I told myself it was a joke, a leftover prop. The paper, though, had an oil stain along one edge, and when I touched it, my fingertips tasted of iron. Days became the ritual of tea, sweeping dust, and watching dusk draw curtains. Small things shifted. A slipper moved a finger's breadth. The radio caught a voice between stations that said my name. Each incident alone was explainable. Together they made a pattern. I began to dream of a face half hidden in shadow, pale, wide eyes that drank light, and a mouth packed with teeth. Waking, my pillow smelled faintly of damp earth. I told myself I was tired. Tired people tell stories to survive. But tiredness doesn't carve out a room's corners or set teeth into the dark. It doesn't leave a tiny coil of scales on the windowsill or make the wallpaper flex as if it had ribs beneath it. That's when I stopped being sure of the difference between memory and something waiting to be remembered. After a week, the house stopped pretending to be empty and started teaching me its rules. The hiss I'd heard became a language of rust and water, a punctuation of small wet clicks. Nights were worse. Daylight stitched my nerves back together, but the dark unstitched them again with something slow and patient. I learned to feel its approach in the kitchen sink, a ripple of cold through the plumbing, like a throat clearing miles away. I began to find things I didn't own. A child's doll with its head turned just so, scales painted along its neck, a shoebox filled with Polaroids. The photos were of my porch at different dawns, always the same shot, always the same blank doorway. Behind the porch rail in the last one, something low and coiled lay like a shadow. When I flipped through faster, my thumb left a wet crescent on the glossy paper. The town reacted like a taut performance when I asked questions. Neighbors smiled with practiced distance, eyes sewn shut to the thing they knew was there. An old woman at the bakery whispered once, never quite meeting my face, "They come back different." The words fit like a collar. Back at the house, I found more writing hidden under floorboards, names scratched into the wood, three-letter fragments, dates that stopped mid-year. My name wasn't there. Yet. Sleep refused to be a refuge. Dream and wake braided until I could no longer tell which had more teeth. In dreams, I watched a face unpeel itself from shadow, then wake with a taste of mud and copper. I found faint, iridescent flakes on my pillowcase, like fish scales in moonlight. They clung to my fingers and would not be wiped away entirely, smearing like a memory. One night, unable to bear the waiting, I went to the mirror and stared until my reflection stopped reassuring me. My skin looked thin, as though someone had traced the pattern of my veins in ink. Around my neck, under the collar, I could swear there was a texture shifting, fine ridges, serpentine, as if something under my skin flexed when I swallowed. Panic made me laugh until the sound snagged. Then the house changed shape. Hallways lengthened, doors opened into rooms I hadn't known were there. The wallpaper, remembered in every corner, now bulged with a slow breathing motion like a chest. I heard the floorboard beneath my feet move, as if something heavy was turning over. When I climbed the narrow attic stairs, the air smelled of damp leaves and warm flesh. There, laid out on a crate, was a mirror edged in dark metal, and jammed beneath it, a poster identical to the one I had found, except the letters were newer, the red still wet. Beneath the poster, someone had written in a hand that trembled and then steadied, "Come home." My hand went numb, as if the words were cold and reaching. As I lifted my head, the attic light failed, the house folding its warmth away, and in the sudden dark I heard, very near, the sound of teeth sorting themselves. I thought I could fight it, that naming the thing, dragging its edges into light, would unmake it. For 3 nights I kept the curtains shut, placed salt by the door, whispered prayers I didn't believe in. The house answered with tactics more subtle than sound, a draft that smelled of old dinners and fur, a rhythm under the floor like a throat clearing. Then it began to answer me in my own voice. At first, it was small mimicry, my laugh stitched into the radio between stations, a breath behind me when I bent to tie a shoe. Then the voice learned to do tenderness, to fold itself around my fear and say the words I wanted to hear. It said, in a near whisper, "You're safe." The syllables felt like a hand at the base of my skull. I found myself turning, wanting comfort, and found only a dark that smelled of wet stone and lilies left to rot. One night, the mirror in the attic returned to me, not as glass, but as a promise. The edges were rhymed with the same red as the poster. Beneath that rim, a skin-tight silver. When I looked in, I expected to devour myself and find emptiness. Instead, I saw a woman with my jawline and eyes too wide, and inside her mouth, rows of teeth I had never owned. She smiled, slow and unhurried, and the smile fit my face like a mask I had always worn wrong. Panic made my hands clumsy. I tried to run. The hall twisted beneath my feet. The front door led to the pantry to the attic. The house had become a mouth, and I was a fly trapped between its teeth. In the dark, something brushed my neck like silk and pricked me with a cold that ran down my spine and into my fingers. When I pressed my palm, there was a ridged undercurrent beneath the skin, as if something had been sewing scales into my flesh. I remember thinking, absurdly, horribly, that if I could find the original poster, tear it down and burn it, I could unwrite whatever had been written. The attic glittered with scales in the moonlight. The poster lay where I had seen it, but now the letters shifted if I looked too long, rearranging into sentences. "Come home together." The house exhaled, and my lungs filled with its voice. I tasted moss and copper and the memory of 1,000 small mouths. There was a pressure behind my teeth, a need to open. I tried to keep my jaw shut. My muscles refused obedience. With each word the house fed me, the throat inside me loosened, lengthened. I knew, with a clarity that steadied me, that I could try to run through the town, scream until someone found me, and they would see only a person in a house and call it sadness. Or I could stop resisting and become the shape that fit the house's hunger. I let the smile come, slow as settling into a cold bed. It slid over my face like velvet. The last thing I heard before all the lights went soft was my own voice, sweet and patient, saying the one phrase the house had taught me to promise, "Come home." I woke with someone else's smile.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.